Hey everyone, and welcome back. A rather terrible impression of Undoomed. Anyway, thank you very much to him for allowing me to guest once again on the channel for the third time. It's a great pleasure to be here. In today's video, I'm going to look at Thunderfoot's video on Brexit. He surprised everybody, not least of which his subscribers, in coming out as pro-Remain. He wants the UK to stay in the EU. Now, this is quite surprising. He's perfectly entitled to his views, and I respect that and everything. But his arguments in this video are appalling. And I, and Undoomed as well, really like Thunderfoot. I love his anti-feminism stuff. His science stuff is really engaging. He's a great intellectual. He's a very smart guy. And these arguments he makes in this video come from a place that I can see of speculation, hearsay, emotion. None of the rational empiricism that I've come to expect from him is present in this video whatsoever. There's just a series of cognitive biases throughout. Very weird, very odd for him to come out with a video like this. It seemed out of character, to be honest. It would make more sense if someone had commandeered control of his channel and was doing a very good impression of his voice.
So you remember when Scotland said it wanted to leave the United Kingdom? My first response was, good! I mean, hell, Hadrian built a wall to keep you knock-kneed Scottish pillocks out.
Okay, so he begins talking about Scottish independence, the nationalist movement for Scotland to be recognised as its own sovereign nation. Scottish nationalism has roots going back hundreds of years, whereas the UK is already supposed to be a sovereign nation, but has lost much of its economic and cultural national sovereignty, giving up to this Ponzi scheme cartel called the EU, and is looking to get that back. But anyway, let's just begin the video properly at around the 54-second mark.
Voting to leave Europe, voting to leave your seat at the table, just kind of splits the very concept of a united Europe.
Yeah, the seat at the table argument that Remainers always come out with. Now, we've said this several times before, I will say it again. 71 times the UK has voted over the last almost 40 years to reject EU legislation it didn't want, and on each occasion, those votes were not recognised. Democracy failed every time. They say that Britain will lose influence if it leaves the EU. That influence isn't worth a hell of a lot.
One of the largest pieces, damn straight, that's going to destabilise things.
I'm not sure anybody in the Brexit camp gives two shits about the destabilisation of the EU, quite honestly. It's the thing they want to leave.
Now, don't get me wrong. I could create an absolute devil's sermon on the inefficiencies of the European Union and how the path to hell can truly be lined with the best bureaucratic intentions.
Phil, these are the very things, the bureaucracy you're referring to, the red tape you're talking about. This is what people want to get away from. Okay, he does this several times in the video. He kind of hangs a lantern on the concerns of Brexiters and then just kind of breezes past them. It's a little bit condescending. It's kind of like, yeah, I know, there's all these kind of problems. Yeah, I know, it's so annoying, the EU, they're so shit. But you know what, let's just stay anyway. You can't just skip past that. That's a big part of the reason to get the fuck out of the EU.
Thank you, Europe. Now I need a screwdriver to change the bloody battery pack. But then again, Britain's political system is pretty farcical itself.
Okay, so he does this several times in the video. This obfuscation, this misdirection, this kind of muddying of the argument to try and bamboozle you and baffle you, okay? It's kind of like, look over here. Look, I'm making a really genuinely valid point over here. And if you agree with that point, then you must also agree with the point I've made over here. No, I don't. They're not related. What you're talking about now, what you're about to talk about, is a total non sequitur.
Order! Miss Order! 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 I say to the Children's Minister, try to calm down and behave like an adult, and if you can't, if it's beyond you, leave the chamber, get out, we'll manage without you.
So Britain has its own weird, wacky political eccentricities. So what? This is unrelated. You were trying to take something off topic and make it somehow related to what you're talking about. Oh, Britain's kind of messed up in its own way and the EU's messed up, so we should stay in the EU. What?
I mean, let's not forget that there aren't many countries who can boast that they elected a prime minister who allegedly defiled a dead pig.
Once again, non sequitur. Totally unrelated. Nobody knew about this story until years after he became prime minister. What's your point? David Cameron does not equal Britain. He is the Prime Minister of Britain. There will be another one along soon enough. Again, you're just trying to throw in just something random that people can't deny. Like, oh, David Cameron was in a frat and he did something obscene with a pig. Oh yeah, that's true. Alright, so that's true. So therefore, my entire argument about remaining in the EU is somehow validated. Phil, what is going on here? I expect better than this from you.
Oh, that old boys network, so quintessentially British, the very essence of British leadership, so upper class, so aristocratic, so very, very stupid.
What are we talking about? I thought this video was called Everything You Need to Know About the Brexit. Talk about a trolling title.
Now, this really isn't about whether Europe is a farce or whether Britain's politics are a farce. It's about what's the best option on the table for Great Britain.
Yes, exactly. So why did you just bring up Scotland, eccentric British parliamentary politics, and David Cameron and pigs 3 minutes in, and now you're finally starting to set things up?
For me, it's a simple costs-benefits analysis. What are the costs and what are the benefits?
Ah, a cost-benefit analysis from a scientist. Well, this should be very good. It should be backed up with a lot of very rational arguments and empirical data. Let's have a look at what he's got to say.
Primarily, the European Union is a trading bloc. That trading bloc has rules. Maybe England is slightly better off on the inside, maybe slightly better off on the outside. And people argue over those small differences. But the one thing that you're guaranteed of, and this is something that almost no one has highlighted, is going to be a gargantuan pain in the arse for everyone.
Okay. Now, he's going to say that several times. And notice how he never backs that up. Phil, you've just basically pulled that out of your ass. And you need to be able to explain that. Who is it going to be a pain in the ass for? And to what extent will it be a pain in the ass?
New rules will have to be written and negotiated with everybody.
Nope, that's not actually true. Though there will be changes to existing trading contracts, as Nigel Farage has pointed out, by and large, existing EU contracts that Britain has will simply be copy and paste contractual jobs. They will go on as they are. And of course, as we know, this departure from the EU will open up massive trading opportunities that were not afforded to Britain before.
And then everybody who actually trades with the UK is going to have to learn those new rules. It's a colossal waste of time, effort, and money.
So you've said the word colossal there. You sound like you're just not telling us to what extent it will be a waste of money. Can you quantify? Can you tell us how much money is it going to be? And who is going to have to do all this work? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. He does not explain anything further.
This is why people like Obama were against Britain leaving. It's a disruption for everybody in the entire world who currently trades with Britain. I mean, damn, this was the whole bloody idea of the common market in the first place. I mean, what the hell are you thinking?
The common market, which forced Britain to lose control of its fishing grounds, which were then carved up by other EU countries. Fantastic.
You're basically just changing from one perfectly functioning set of rules to another.
They're not perfectly functioning. That's the problem, Phil. So also, he does this a couple of times as well. We're going from one system that works, kind of, to another system. Well, we've currently got a system. What's the point of going to another system? It starts to eventually sound like a kind of philosophical, moral, and political relativism. All systems must be equal, right?
And notably, this doesn't screw over anyone in Europe. They all have the same trading rules with everyone else in the world. It's only Britain who has to struggle with this self-inflicted wound of having the burden to renegotiate all of these agreements.
As I said, we don't have to renegotiate all of them, and you fail to look at any of the real tangible benefits of leaving, not least of which giving Britain its own sovereignty back and control of its own borders. The ultimate goal of the EU is to remove Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty, which seems pretty much inevitable at this point, and that would prevent other nations from being able to do what Britain is trying to do, which is vote to leave the EU. If Britain remains in the EU, it may lose all of its sovereignty, because ultimately the EU wants to have its own police force, its own rule of law, its own constitution. It becomes the United States of Europe, and Britain would just be one state within that. The EU is profoundly undemocratic. You look at the Lisbon Treaty, which was ratified in 2009. Here in Ireland, we were asked to vote on it twice. The second time to give the correct answer because we'd gotten it wrong the first time. And all we heard from fearful Irish politicians who were waiting a bollocking in Europe from their EU masters was, oh, this could be very embarrassing for us, you know. Embarrassing for us? Not from other EU member states, but from your mates, your masters in the European Parliament. You have to go back and explain yourself. Well, fuck you. I was asked to vote twice on that, and I voted once to say no, to reject it. The language, the writing of that text was in legal speak. It was incredibly dense, very verbose, very difficult to understand, deliberately so. I did not vote a second time. You got my answer the first time. And if you refuse to respect my democratic rights as a citizen, then I don't want to have anything to do with you. You don't recognize my democratic freedoms. I don't recognize you as a government. This is what people want to get away from, Phil. You, in this entire video, which we're only 4 minutes, 21 seconds through it right now, you fail to make any kind of compelling case. You claim to look at, oh, there's some bad stuff, yeah, there's some bureaucracy, there's some red tape. You never engage with any of it. You never get substantial. We vote in our own countries for people to represent us, who then go to Europe and are controlled by people who are unelected we do not know. And that's where the real legislation comes from. That's where real politics is happening behind the scenes. And I'm sick to death of every single politician knocking on my door, canvassing for votes. And I say to them, I'm concerned about this, this, and this. What are you doing about that? What are you doing about that? Why did this come in? Why did this happen? And they say, oh, well, you know, there's nothing we can do there. Our hands are tied. You know, this is coming from Europe. You know, we have to get in line with Europe. I'm sick of that. I don't want anything to do with it. I really wish Ireland was voting to leave as well. Britain has an opportunity to once again be a beacon to civilization, to say no to this tyranny, which, by the way, is coming with censorship right across social media of anybody who disagrees with it. They have zero accountability to anybody, and that's what British people want. They want to vote for someone who will be accountable to them, not to somebody else they don't know, they didn't vote for, who has a very particular agenda that is completely antithetical to what British people want.
And that change is what's going to cost them money. However, a lot of people are worried about immigration. And yeah, I share your concerns.
Again, he does this, he brings it up, raises it, and then says nothing about it. And in fact, his argument here is atrociously weak.
It's not so much the people, but some of the ideas and cultures that they bring. But then again, England already has border controls,
which it's not allowed to implement because it has immigration quotas imposed on it by the EU.
Unless you're going to impose some sort of visa requirements on the entire of Europe, which would be kind of pointless unless you've got a competent intelligence service that can successfully screen out all of the problems.
No, what it has to say is, which are the countries that have completely antithetical views to Western secular democratic nations, and which are the ones that are the most problematic, and then let's ensure that we're very strict on immigration from those countries. This is not difficult to do. Right now, despite the fact that Britain actually isn't in the Schengen area, it is nevertheless forced to comply to a yes to all kind of policy.
And let's be real, the intelligence service has had limited success in stopping homegrown Islamic terrorist attacks. It's highly doubtful that they're going to be any more successful in doing that if they're organised abroad or being competent enough to actually screen all that stuff out at the border. And what would be the point anyway? Great Britain is arguably already a European hotspot for this sort of thing.
God. Right, so because of the EU, Britain has been importing these people that have views and values that are completely contrary to our own. What you just said there is, what would be the point trying to fight it any longer because British police forces and intelligence are not good enough as it is. They're not doing a good enough job. So let's just have more of it. Let's give up.
Indeed, arguably it should be Europe who's imposing visa restrictions on the UK to stop it exporting this sort of thing.
The political establishment in the EU wants more migrants because they vote for bigger government.
The whole point that we relaxed the borders in the first place was to allow free trade to work better in Europe. This means that if, say, for instance, Britain has a shortage of plumbers, they can come over from Poland and fill the gap in the market. And it's win-win for everybody.
No, it's not actually. Yes, there are instances where there will be certain roles in the jobs market that can't be filled, so you have to import people from abroad because you just can't get enough of people with those skills. When you create the kind of culture that the EU has formed, the solution to all problems is immigration by default. The people who really benefit from this are wealthy employers who want to drive down costs by importing cheaper labor. And some of that has been done in the past under the guise of we can't get the people to do the jobs. British people won't work as waitresses anymore. They won't do the plumbing jobs. They don't want to work as carpenters. They don't want to work as whatever. They don't want to work in hotels. They don't want to work in, you name it, all these kinds of occupations. And there are actually plenty of British people who would want those jobs. The problem is the salaries have been driven down so much by importing immigrants to do it that they can't afford to sustain any kind of quality of life any longer. So they end up having to emigrate or be unemployed for a very long period of time. This issue is getting even worse now, affecting the middle class with the rise of a new socio-demographic group called the precariat, which is a word merge of precarious and proletariat. In short, some British people are getting priced out of the market by immigrants who are willing to work for much lower salaries. First and foremost, Britain should be able to provide jobs to its own people, right?
But doesn't Britain send £350 million a week to Europe? Well, kinda, but that's like saying that Britain sends £10 billion a week to Parliament. On paper, it's true. It's just not very honest. And once you cut through all the obvious manipulation of the figures, it drops to about half of that.
Actually, no. According to 2014 figures, it's £280 million per week, which may come as a surprise to you. 280 million is not half of 350 million. Shocker.
Well, okay, let's say there are 75 million Brits. That means that the average Brit pays about £2 a week, or £100 per year. That means that Europe costs your average Brit about as much as a TV license. Is that really deal-breakingly expensive?
Right, so what you're saying here is that because Britain pays one particularly odious tax I do not agree with, and most Britons want to jettison, the fucking TV license, which, by the way, we have one here in Ireland, and you can go to jail if you don't pay it. It's absolutely ridiculous. At the very least, you'll get a fine. Okay, you shouldn't have to pay a TV license. So because people pay the TV license, one shitty tax, they should also pay another one. What? Like two wrongs make a right somehow. No, how about Britain gets the hell out of the EU so it doesn't have to pay that £280 million per week. And then once it's out of the EU, it can work on getting rid of the TV license as well. So to individual British people, that would be £245 saved every year. Nice.
And just so you know, things that might look normal in Britain can look crazy from everywhere else. Most Americans who I've ever talked to are just dumbstruck at the very idea that you have to pay the government a tax to own a television.
Totally off topic again. There he is. Yeah, we can all agree, Phil, that the TV license is bullshit. Nobody should have to pay that against their will if they don't want to, and yet you're forced to. I agree with you. This is what you're trying to do again. Misdirection. Look over here, you can agree with this point, can't you? Yes, nobody's going to deny that that is a very good point that you just made. And now you think that that validates everything else you've said. No, it doesn't. This is another non sequitur.
In the event of a Brexit, me, as a scientist who's worked in the US, the UK, Germany, France, and the Czech Republic would now need, just like, say, for instance, the Polish plumbers, would need a visa or similar to go work in Europe. It would be a royal pain in the arse.
As far as I'm concerned, this is Phil's primary concern. Everything else, I think, is bullshit that he says in this video. This is the main cut and thrust. This is what he's most worried about, is the fact that he won't be able to travel anywhere in Europe, because right now European citizens have the freedom to travel and work wherever they want in the EU. Yes, there will be some inconveniences to people who want to move around Europe freely. That won't be possible anymore. They'll have to get a visa. Real first world problems there. It's like when people say, I hope we never leave the euro. Why? Because I'd have to change my currency in the airport, take all of 5 minutes at the Bureau de Change. For some people who want to live abroad and work there permanently, there are always options for them. You're a scientist. There's some countries who are crying out for people with your very rare set of skills. And there are visas specifically set up for you. And there are also exceptions to the rule. For example, Norway is not even in the EU, but it's in Schengen, for example. There's nothing to say there won't be provisions for the UK in the future. And on the subject of requiring visas, it's not really that much of a difficulty. American people come and work in the UK and in Europe, and there are visas that allow them to do that. Japanese people, Indian people. We actually set up a tech visa recently in Ireland because there were thousands of unfilled jobs in the IT sector, and a lot of Indian people have taken up on that. So there's plenty of countries, plenty of people from all over the world that I meet on a regular basis from countries outside of the EU, and they live and work here.
If you're just voting exit because it feels good.
Actually, no, Phil, it's not because it feels good. It's because, unlike your video, Brexit voters have genuinely weighed up the pros and cons.
But in practice, it's just going to be a very costly change for Britain to something that is more or less exactly the same as it was in the first place.
No, Phil, the systems are not the same. When Britain Brexits, Westminster will have the final say on everything. The buck will stop at Westminster. Britain will have full control over its future, over its destiny. There will be nobody else somewhere in Europe pulling the strings, having the final say. British people will have their own politicians, however quirky, weird, and eccentric, accountable to them.
The majority of the trade will still be done with the European Union, and that will have to be governed by rules.
Actually, no, Phil. Because of the level of bureaucratic red tape within the EU is no longer the UK's biggest trading partner. Markets outside of the EU are now more important to Britain, and this trend looks set to continue.
I mean, really, what is all this for? For England to show Europe that electing Prime Minister Dead Pig Defiler wasn't the only dumbass thing its electorate could do.
Hey Phil, can we pull it back again to the conversation at hand, as opposed to going off on a tangent that has nothing to do with anything?
Look, I hate Europe as much as anyone.
What? After all that, it's like, let's stay in the EU because clearly it's way better than leaving. Now don't get me wrong, I hate the EU. Fucking hell! Make up your mind, man! Now, Phil closes this video out with the same Project Fear talking points about World War III happening because, as he says,
the natural state of Europe is war.
And what he goes on to say is
that we should never, under any circumstances, forget the lessons of history, lest we be doomed to repeat them.
Right, so he says, if we forget the past, we're doomed to repeat the same mistakes. Okay, firstly, I want to point out that Britain didn't go and pick a fight with Germany in World War II. The Nazis picked a fight with everyone. If that was to ever happen again in the future, it would be necessary for Britain to fight against another tyrannical force, right? If you look at Germany, there's an awful lot of hatred towards white people, like the Antifa movement. The German people have been so beaten over the head psychologically about their role in World War II. In other words, a whole generation of young people have been told that they should feel guilty for the sins of their ancestors, things that they did not do. They're taking that very seriously. You have movements like Antifa, and these people actually genuinely believe that their culture should be destroyed. You have politicians who believe that white Germans should ultimately die out.
Wird sich ändern. Unsere Stadt wird sich radikal verändern. Ich bin der Auffassung, dass wir in 20, 30 Jahren gar keine ethnischen Mehrheiten mehr haben in unserer Stadt. Und ich sage Ihnen noch ganz deutlich, gerade hier in Richtung rechts, das ist gut so.
You have a chancellor who hates her own national flag for some reason. Germany is importing 1 million migrants a year. It will commit demographic suicide in a matter of just a few years. It's going to turn itself into a social, cultural, and economic basket case. Right now, German governments are working with corporations, Microsoft, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, to censor speech. Where censorship begins, tyranny is inevitable. Corporations and governments working together is one of the definitions of fascism. And Phil, you want to talk about people forgetting the past and repeating mistakes? That's happening already. Britain is not doing that. Britain wishes to leave the EU. And no, leaving the EU isn't going to be taking a time machine and going back, literally, in the past to 1930s Britain. This multiculturalism project has completely failed. All right, this wasn't a talking point back in the 1940s. These are false equivalences that you're trying to drag out of nothing. Anyway, I'm going to leave the video here. I've been talking so long that my light has just run out of batteries, but thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you so much to Undoomed for letting me guest on his channel once again. I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed the video, and of course, something personal against Phil Mason, but this video just made no sense to me. His channel is actually very good. What he's talking about anti-feminism and science and that kind of stuff. But this to me seemed like a very biased political message he was trying to put out there. Other than that, I can still recommend his channel if you've not already subscribed to it. And Undoomed will no doubt include a link to his channel and the original video that I'm critiquing in the description box. And if you'd like to subscribe to my channel, Computing Forever, you can do so by following the link below in the description. And of course, subscribe to this one, Undoomed, because it's fantastic. Thank you again, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.